Kia ora, g'day, welcome back. Here with another question from Solly over in the UK. So shout out, bro. Here we go. If you could implement any training you wished, what would your ideal tier 1 selection / cycle look like? That's the first part. Cool question. I can't help but think I've been asked maybe something similar to that before. And therefore, as Murphy's Law, I cannot remember what I said. But it'll be on my YouTube channel there somewhere. I think it was from a supporter here in NZ, maybe last year. I want to say last year sometime. Anyway, if I could implement any training I wished, what would my ideal tier 1 selection / cycle look like? I think if I look at selection first, I mean, I would, and I think I shared maybe in that video that I did a while ago, that some sort of hybrid between NZ and Australia, merging some of those elements together into a selection is something that I quite like the idea of because of some of the differences between the two. Obviously, Australian selection being 21 days, NZ testing being about 10 days, or at least it was 9 or 10 days, not including the 5-day pre-selection. So some sort of hybrid between the two is something that is appealing to me. At least I think it was back when I answered a question similar to this before. And, well, it feels interesting to me, like now anyway. And I can't help but think that I had shared a similar thought last time I got asked a similar sort of question. So I think something between the two, trying to find a balance. What that would mean is probably selection would probably look more like going for a month in duration, thereabouts. And obviously with that, there'd be, I guess, the way Australia has it broken up into phases and stages, something along those lines with a phased approach so that, you know, you're getting a good mix of both NZ and Australia type, not specific experiences, but elements to the selection course. So if I was to try to break that down and make it a bit more clearer, I suppose, I'd keep all of the mandatory requirements pretty much for the NZ and Australian selection. So some of the common things are the 2.4. I'd keep those. I'd keep the body weight requirements with the push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, etc. I'd keep the swim test. You know, I'd find a balance between NZ and Australia's swim test, the treading water, and all that sort of stuff. The pack work and requirements, or pack march testing, I'd keep that again, find a balance between Australia's and New Zealand's, and then implement that. And then one thing, between the two are very similar, but they're similar but different, is the Australia having the 3.2 and NZ having the hares and hounds. So they're both webbing runs. They're both in your kit with your webbing, with your rifle, and you're running. But the NZ webbing run hares and hounds is about 8 or 9 kilometers from memory, and the 3.2 is obviously 3.2. 3.2, you've got to run at a much faster clip because you've got to come in under 16 minutes. Hares and hounds, I can't remember what the time frame is, but it's about 8 or 9 kilometers, so it's obviously not 16 minutes. But I like the thought of keeping those, not keeping both of them so that candidates would have to go through and pass them in the one selection course, but alternating between the two. You know, I think that would be a nice little mix, a spanner, so to speak, thrown into the works, whereby candidates aren't going to be confronted with having to pass both of those in addition to all those other physical elements that I spoke about. Still keep all those other physical pieces, and like I said, find a balance between the pack marching stuff, find a balance between the swim test and the 2.4s and the body weight stuff. So that's pretty standard. But the 3.2 and the hares and hounds, those two I would want to alternate. And candidates wouldn't know when. Doesn't mean, oh yeah, everybody goes back after they've done a selection, you know, and they go, oh yeah, we did the 3.2 this selection, so the next one's going to be the hares and hounds next, or vice versa, you know. Like it'd just be a case of keeping people on their toes. It might be run the 3.2, 2, 3, 4, 5 selections in a row, and then bang, next minute's the hares and hounds, or vice versa. You know, so just something like that would be an additional little tweak to those sort of mandatory physical components of what candidates typically have to pass. But from the perspective of a hybrid approach to your question, from, you know, if I had the opportunity to do something like that. The other part, the other parts of the selection. Again, that's where I would want to combine the phases of the Australian selection with elements again of the New Zealand one. So, what do I mean by that? There's this beasting physical phase in Australia where there's just a whole bunch of PT day in, day out, early hours in the morning, throughout the day, late in the afternoon, into the evening again, where that happens repeatedly in conjunction with specific tasks that you're needing to do. So other tasks that candidates have explained to them, and then they are expected to go and then perform and carry out those tasks. This isn't the role play type stuff. These are like actual practical soldiering type tasks. It might be something as simple as digging a shell scrape. It might be digging a gun pit and a shell scrape. It might be setting up a sandbag fighting bay sanger with the sandbags, like all of those types of stuff, but specific little jobs or tasks. And then in between, you're getting hammered with PT. So I would want to keep that aspect for that phase. And then I would still want to keep the Von Temsky. So that element of either the dunes or the swamp or through the bush with all your gear on and carrying a jerry can in a small team, not allowed to talk to each other. If there's 5 of you, there'll be 6 jerry cans. If there's 4, there'll be 5 jerry cans, etc. One person's always going to have 2. I'd still want to keep that as part of a selection process. I just think that that's a really great mental toughness, resilience tool, as well as it's physically blinking pretty uncomfortable. So again, it's going to challenge the whole person. Was it body, mind, and spirit? I think anyway. And it will help people, or maybe not so much help, but it will identify people that do want to be there, that have that drive to want to be there. So I'd want to keep that as well as all that the physical beastings portion of that particular phase in Australia. Then have the technical, the navigational phase, whether that goes for roughly a week or whatever. You're having the open country and close country navigation, getting from point A to point B. Got to move as quick as you can to and as safely as you can, as tactically as you can at times, to get from where you are to where you need to be, and clocking up the kilometers and or meeting the timings so that you can move while you are fatigued and tired, and get to those areas that you need to get to within the timeframes allocated. So I'd want to keep obviously a heavy navigational technical portion of the selection, which is a critical part. And then the last phase for this selection, if I had my way, would be that lucky dip phase that Australia has. And culminating at the end of that, keeping the NZ60 clicker piece attached to that. So so that's what I would look at. What does that look like? So that's all the physical stuff. One phase, testing phase in terms of the mandatory stuff. Then, so say maybe that's phase 1. Then phase 2 is all that other physical beasting stuff, along with Von Temsky. Phase 3 is the technical navigational stuff, long distances, all that sort of stuff, and you've got to meet the timings, etc. And then phase 4 would be the lucky dip with the 60 clicker at the end still. So those would be the 4 phases in what I would look to design and have as part of a selection course. And as a result, I think that would then need to be roughly about 4 weeks long. So it may not need to be 4 weeks long. It may be slightly less, maybe between 3 to 4 weeks, somewhere in between there. But that's what I'm thinking. So obviously there'd need to be considerations given to fueling of candidates. So the amount of food, you couldn't run that, well, you probably could, but I don't know how many people would get through. But I don't think it would be fair and or reasonable to run a selection course that long and run it on the limited amount of food that the NZ selection provides, as an example. Like that's just, it's not fair. It's not reasonable. I think that's a very big ask for anybody to do. And I suppose just on that, and I think I've shared this before, the selection courses for NZ and Australia, as challenging and as hard and as difficult as they are, and they should be, which is awesome, they are also very pragmatic. They're also very, like I said, they're fair and reasonable. So that aspect of a selection course would be important to me to want to try to maintain, while still keeping the uncertainty, while still making sure that it's hard. And there will be, different phases. There'll be challenging things within each phase. And that culmination, the lucky dip, that phase will definitely be hard. And that phase is probably similar to the lack of, where the real lack of food and all that sort of stuff and the real sleep deprivation really kick in nearing the end of that selection. So when you have an idea that you are nearing the end, but it's still roughly about 7 days left to go till you actually completed it, you'll have an idea that you are nearing the end, but you're going to feel essentially a heck of a lot worse than what you were when you first got there, over those first sort of 2-3 weeks, if that makes sense. So anyway, that's my take on that. For the cycle, what would the cycle look like? I'd keep all the same courses that I did from NZ and Australia as part of that cycle, like they work. The cycle would possibly be a little bit longer. Perfect world, if it was possible and you had the numbers in the squadrons and stuff already able to do what they needed to do. What do I mean by that? What does that look like longer? Maybe 18 months to 2-year cycle to really bed down a lot of the skills and stuff that have been taught and that candidates learn. It's not that those timeframes aren't enough. And maybe I've not used the right words. Maybe it's not necessarily trying to bed down more those courses that I've done in NZ and Australia during previous cycles. Maybe it's more about feeding more courses. Maybe it's like, to your other question, drones. Maybe it's adding that course in there. Maybe it's adding in a language course or two during that period of time if we're going to make it 18 months to 2 years long as a cycle. Maybe it is in and around everybody being cross-trained in SIG and medics, everybody being cross-trained in marksman sniper, everybody being cross-trained in tracking, everybody being cross-trained in insertion skills, so vehicle mounted, mountain troop, free fall, water, like all of those things take time. And would an 18-month to 24-month period for a cycle enable that to happen? Maybe not all of what I just shared there, because that's a lot of cross pollination, cross training in terms of skills wise and information overload, so to speak. And 2 years, that's really not a heck of a lot of time, unless you're just going to run back to back to back and there's zero breaks. Even then, I think that would be pushing it. So maybe wouldn't get through all of those, but in my head, trying to think on the spot here, it's not like I've taken your question and then written down a list of things and gone, oh yeah, this is what I reckon, and I'd do this and do that. Obviously, if I was going to plan something like this, or if I had an opportunity to do something like this for real, that would take some real proper sitting down with people much smarter than me and planning that out fully. So you're getting the Temu version, no frills version of me just spitballing right here. So yeah, 18 months to 2 years cycle. More courses added in is probably the better words to use, rather than trying to bed down what has already traditionally been able to be achieved and accomplished and receive a level of competency before graduating and going into a squadron. Adding more courses in, and those courses, it might not even be all of those cross-pollination courses that I spoke about. It may be more specific to the way current warfare is being looked at and implemented these days, i.e. the drones and that sort of stuff. Or maybe it does include the drones, and maybe it still does include several of those other courses that I just mentioned, because that's a lot of cross-pollination and training. Like SIG and medics course, those are lengthy courses. Your insertion courses are lengthy courses. Language courses are lengthy courses. So, again, I just don't think 2 years would cover and be able to, cover all of those crossovers, as much as it might be nice to be able to do. But I think there would be several other courses that could be added and reasonably completed and conducted within that time frame if need be. So yeah, that's my take in terms of your question. And then you've got here, the next part. Also, you mentioned in another vid, the Australian SA selection had certain challenges the NZ SA selection didn't. That's true. Does that make it more superior in your view? The short answer to that from me again, I think I gave a short answer before, is no. I don't think it makes the Australian selection more superior. I think it makes the Australian selection perfectly fit for what they look to select for. Likewise, even though I haven't done the UK one, their one's perfectly adapted to what it is that they select and what they're looking for, as with NZ, as with, I presume, the US and Delta Force, etc., etc. So, no, it definitely, for me though, like going from doing the NZ one and then being exposed to essentially what was all brand new country, brand new way of, brand new culture, and their way of communicating and doing things was different to back home in NZ, by and large, you know. Um, and then the landscape and the structure, the duration of the Australian selection, all of these unknowns to me. Like I knew about the 3.2, I knew there was the standard physical fitness stuff that would be needing to have to pass, and I'd heard about this thing called Lucky Dip, which was going to be miserable. So those are sort of my references and landmarks, but I didn't know what was involved in Lucky Dip. I didn't know how long the navigation phase was going to be. You know, there was just a whole bunch of more unknowns, I think, for me going onto the Australian one than there was in NZ. And I think I've spoken about that before, just because you know, the NZ one was 19 days total, and not including the 4 or 5 day pre-selection. Had a pretty good idea of what was going to be happening on each day over that period of time. Whereas the Australian one, yeah, I really didn't have much of an idea at all. So I think I think it added more spice to, for me personally. Like, oh, this is to a degree, I would say, somewhat exciting too, for me personally, because there's a lot of unknowns in there. And then it wasn't until I was in it that I then had to try to adapt, think quick on my feet, respond appropriately, conduct my actions in accordance with what the tasks were and all the instructions so that I could perform as well as I could. All the while not knowing if I was doing very well at all. And in fact, I think by and large, by the time I got to the end of the Australian selection, probably similar to my time at the end of the New Zealand one, actually, mentally wise, I think I had predominantly resided myself to the fact that I probably wasn't going to get selected for cycle. That's just what I thought, for a number of things that happened during the Australian cycle during my time. But even though those things were happening, I wasn't going to quit because of them. And that was just where my head went. But even though I'd already, mentally prepared, I guess you could say, and resided myself to the fact that I'm probably not going to get selected for cycle, so I thought, I already knew I was going to come back. So like my mental wiring or hardwiring upstairs was already at such a point that I just knew I was going to come back regardless of whatever the decision was going to be. I'm going to come back and do it. If you tell me, okay, yep, not good enough to go on cycle this time, cool. I'm going to go away, train, recover, then train, and get back into it and reapply as soon as I can and come back, and I'm going to do it again. Because now I've got another reference. I know I've completed your selection. I know I can complete it again. I just likely need to improve on some other areas. Maybe it was how I spoke. Maybe it was what I didn't say. Maybe it was how how I conducted myself physically with certain tasks and actions on different stages of the selection. A lot of that would have been guesswork for me, but it would have been a puzzle that I would have been that I was already invested mentally in trying to solve so that I could get to where I wanted to get to. So hopefully that makes sense anyway. And hopefully that answers your question or your questions. So anyway, thanks very much again, Solly. Thanks to anybody that spent any time here. And I'll see you on the next one.